This is America's Roundtable from Washington, D.C., a weekly radio program with leading voices from America and international thinkers representing the academia, business, think tanks, media, and the political arena. I'm Joel Anand, your co-host, joined by Natasha Sardorch, an economist and chairman of the International Leaders Summit. At America's Roundtable, we are pleased to have as one of our distinguished guests this weekend, the Honorable Artur Davis. Mr. Davis is a former four-term member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Alabama and a current fellow at Harvard's prestigious Institute of Politics. Mr. Davis represented the 7th District of Alabama as a Democrat from 2003 to 2010. He was viewed as a rising star in the House, assuming positions of influence, including a seat on the Ways and Means Committee, recruitment chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in the 2008 cycle, and co-chairman of the New Democrat Coalition. Mr. Davis is now a columnist and commentator across a wide media spectrum, and he is a 1990 magna cum laude graduate of Harvard University and a 1993 cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School, is a licensed attorney in Washington, D.C. And it's great to have you join us this weekend on America's Roundtable, Mr. Davis.
Welcome, Mr. Davis.
No, good evening or good afternoon to both of you, and good to talk to your audience.
Wonderful indeed. In fact, a few decades ago, an engaged citizen by the name of Ronald Reagan left the Democratic Party and joined the Republican Party. And Ronald Reagan went on to becoming California's governor and the 40th president of the United States. And when asked, why did he leave the Democratic Party, he responded, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party, the party left me," Ronald Reagan famously stated. In your journey, Mr. Davis, there must have been a point in time whereby you made a decision to leave the Democratic Party. And what were the reasons for leaving the party and joining the center-right movement and becoming a leading voice for Republicans?
Well, Joel, you put your finger on it. I was in the center-right when I was in the Democratic Party. And when I was in the Democratic Party for much of that time, I found myself disagreeing with a lot of positions that were common in the Democratic Party. I stayed in the party because I thought that there was room for someone who held the positions that I held. I stayed in the party because I was an elected official as a Democrat, and voters elected me to be a Democrat, and I didn't think it was appropriate to change while I was in office. But it became clear to me over a period of time that there wasn't much space in the Democratic Party for anyone who was of the center-right political stripe. I think there are a lot of voters in the Democratic universe who are conservatives, moderate conservatives, but in the ranks of the leadership of the Democratic Party, I no longer feel that's a viewpoint that's represented. I think it's a viewpoint that's marginalized. That's become clearer and clearer to me over the last several years. And I'm very comfortable being in the Republican Party. I'm very comfortable defending the Republican Party's positions, and I look forward to participating in this debate that's going on right now over how we strengthen our party, over how we win elections, and how we make our politics and our belief, frankly, more palatable to people than the folks who've been voting for us.
All right. And Mr. Davis, what lessons should the Republican Party and conservatives draw from the recent presidential election?
Well, we've got a lot of work to do as a conservative movement, and the Republican Party has got a lot of work to do. There are two big lessons that I take from last Tuesday. The first one is the American people agree with us on a whole lot of issues, but still didn't vote for us. 51% of the American people, according to the exit polls, want to repeal Obamacare. 54% of the American people believe that raising taxes is not the best way to reduce our deficit. 50% of the American people believe that Republicans would do a better job managing the economy than Democrats. 54% of the American people believe that Republicans would do a better job managing spending. The reality is, despite those positions, a majority of the American people still didn't vote for us, and that says to me that we have convinced the American people we're right on a lot of the particulars, but we've not yet convinced them that we have a sustainable, workable philosophy that ties all of our various beliefs together. And frankly, there's one other aspect. I don't think the American people are certain that we've learned our lessons from the last decade. I don't think the American people are certain that we've learned our lessons from the 2007-2008 financial crisis, and I think they hold that against us. So we've got to do a better job as Republicans of making clear that if we get power, that we're not simply going to rerun the period from 2001 to 2009, and they've got to be convinced that if we get power, that we have not just a few positions they agree with, but a workable philosophy to manage this country.
What is your opinion on taking the lowest common denominator to attract the largest electoral base by embracing fiscal conservatism while at the same time proclaiming truce on certain issues, as Governor Mitch Daniels advised the GOP in 2011?
Well, we are going to remain a conservative party. We're going to remain a party that believes that life begins at conception. We're going to remain a party that believes that marriage ought to be defined as it's been for centuries. We're going to continue to be a party that is a conservative-leaning party on virtually all economic and social issues. But guess what? We're going to have to figure out how to get people to vote for us who aren't conservatives. That's just the mathematics. When 40% of the people in this country call themselves moderates and 35% call themselves conservatives and 25 liberals, if the only thing we can do is attract conservatives to our ranks, we're going to be in the wilderness for a long, long time. We're going to have to get people to vote for us who don't share the conservative worldview. That's just a core reality. And frankly, it means that we've got to make it clear that our party is an inclusive one. I don't know that I would use the word truce that Governor Daniel used, because the other side doesn't seem to be terribly interested in a truce. The other side is very aggressively moving to redefine marriage in state after state. They're very aggressively moving toward an abortion on demand platform, which pretty much sanctions abortion anytime, anywhere, any place, for any purpose. So they're not exactly signing on to a truce. But I think that we have to make it very clear that, frankly, we're happy to have the votes of people who don't necessarily share our core social beliefs. There are a lot of people out there who agree with us on economics, but frankly, they don't agree with us on social issues, and I do want their votes, and I think most Republicans want their votes. So I think we've just got to make it clear that there's room in our party for people who are pro-choice. There's room in our party for people who are pro-gay rights, frankly. There's room in our party for people who do believe government has a role to play, particularly when it comes to reducing poverty. We've certainly got to have room in our party for people who don't share the majority sentiments in our party. And again, that's old-fashioned mathematics if we want to get to 50%. So part of being an inclusive party is making it clear that there's space for people who don't agree with the majority sentiments in the party.
Right. Actually, immigration reform was also cited as one of the major issues that made electorate vote one way or the other. What would be your suggestion to effectively address the immigration reform?
Well, my personal belief is that we've got to find a way to make sure our immigration policy reflects traditional conservative values. And here's what I mean when I say that. We're a pro-family party. A pro-family party should never be eager to rip families apart, and our immigration policy ought to respect that. Our immigration policy ought to find a way to accommodate families and to find a way to see if there's a way to provide some kind of pathway, not towards citizenship, but towards guest worker status, some kind of a pathway out of the shadows, frankly, for families, mothers and fathers and children. A pro-family party ought to be willing to do that. We're also a family that believes deeply in rewarding personal responsibility. We believe in tying welfare benefits to people working. Well, a party that believes in promoting personal responsibility ought to be willing to say to young men that if you go to the military, and women, if you go to the military, if you go to college, we're willing to give you a chance to be part of our country. We're willing to give you a chance to be part of our national fabric as Americans, regardless of what your legal status is now. To me, that is bringing conservatism to our immigration policy. I think when our immigration policy seems separate from our traditional belief in rewarding responsibility and from our traditional belief in respecting and recognizing and privileging families, I think people become frankly suspicious that all our immigration policy is just a disdain for too many people coming in our country who don't look like the rest of us. That's not acceptable. And I think that we lost votes last Tuesday because there were many people who believed candidly that it wasn't that we were anti-illegal immigrant, but that we were anti-immigration. And candidly, I think there were some people who believe that it's not simply immigration that we worry about, but that we worry about the rising Hispanic population. Now, I don't think those are accurate beliefs for most Republicans and most conservatives, but I do think that perception exists. And we have got to free ourselves as a party and as a movement from a perception that when we talk about immigration, that we're more concerned about the culture than the rule of law or the economy.
It is interesting to note, Mr. Davis, that 4 years ago there were similar discussions about an outreach to minorities, as I would call them, the emerging groups of America. Or when you look at the African American community, the Hispanic community, Asian Americans, and so forth. And during that past 4 years, basically what we've seen is certainly there has been activity, but there hasn't been a effective endeavor, a strategy to really reach out. And as an Indian American political strategist for the Democratic Party stated, it has been difficult for the Republicans to invite, say, for example, Asian Americans for a cup of tea. And in light of that, what would you suggest as effective strategies whereby the Republican Party, the conservative movement, would make a concerted effort in reaching out to Asian Americans, African Americans, and Hispanics?
Well, it's a very important question for the future of our party, and I don't think there's any one all-purpose answer. We have a very special challenge with African Americans. There's an African American president who's very popular in the African American community. Not as popular as the rest of the country, obviously, but very popular in the African American community. And he's a role model for many African Americans, particularly younger African Americans. And we're the party that's been the loyal opposition over the last 4 years. Many African Americans hold that against us, and they're going to continue to hold that against us. And I'll be blunt with you, there are many African Americans who believe that if you don't support Barack Obama, that it's a sign of racism. Now, I think that's ridiculous, and I think most Republicans think that's ridiculous, but that is a genuine, sincerely held belief on the part of many African Americans. And that's just simply going to be an albatross that we bear in that community. I do think we have more opportunities with Asian Americans. I do think we have more opportunities with Latino Americans, but we've got to frankly realize that we're not going to get votes just on the cheap. We're not going to get votes simply by appealing to the social conservatism of minority groups. I think there are some in the party who believe that if we just talk a little bit more about our social conservative positions, that we'll get minority votes. The only problem is that's a strategy that has been tried. Right. I've seen that strategy tried for the last 40 years. The African American community is one of the most pro-life constituencies in the country. I'm not sure there's a Republican politician in the country who's gotten a vote based on that. Mm-hmm. The African American community is the second most supportive constituency in the country, behind only Southern whites, of traditional marriage. I'm not sure there's a Republican in the country who managed to get a vote based on that this year. Most minority groups are concerned about their economic aspirations. Most minority groups are still economically insecure, and most minority groups are often a generation removed from poverty. We have to, as a party and a movement, make an economic case. It's not enough to go in the black church and say, I'm for a traditional definition of marriage. when you don't have a platform to offer the middle class or you don't have a statement to make about poverty. It's not enough to go in Latino communities and say you're pro-life unless you're willing to talk about a humane immigration policy and unless you're willing to talk about strengthening the middle class in these communities and lifting up people who are in poverty. And I think conservatism's got to be comfortable with that conversation. We're very comfortable talking about our social conservative values, but we've got to be comfortable talking about what conservatism means for poor people. We've got to be comfortable talking about what conservatism means for lower middle class people. I think conservatism is the best way to create jobs, and the best way, and creating jobs is the best pathway toward upward mobility. But I don't think that we're often clear enough or cogent enough about that as Republicans or conservatives. We've got to be willing to make a case that our way of looking at the world will increase social mobility and increase people's capacity to move from one economic level to another. We can't just sound as if conservatism is purely a defense of people who are doing well.
In fact, Mr. Davis, and as we've looked at some of the issues that have attracted immigrants from around the world to America, is what you've stated: economic opportunity, economic freedom, and the education, specifically in higher education, in the arena of higher education. However, there has been this issue whereby for, say, Asian Americans, the Hispanic American community, or African Americans, the cost of education has been a significant issue. And there has been discussion about school choice has been presented as an opportunity to transform our system. And do you agree with its proponents that it would empower students and families in many of our districts across America? And would this be one of the policy issues that could be presented to key communities whereby it would provide an opportunity for others to embrace this policy initiative?
Absolutely. I think Republicans need to be on record favoring school choice. I think Republicans need to be on record favoring vouchers. I think Republicans need to be on record favoring parents and not bureaucrats or judges getting to decide where the kids go to school. And I think Republicans ought to be on record favoring charter schools. And we ought to be on record favoring the reform of tenure. Right now, there are two professions in America where poor performance is not an automatic grounds for termination. One of them is professional basketball because of the collective bargaining agreement. The other one is public education. The reality is, in a society that has to compete not just with states next door to us, but with countries around the world, we have got to demand higher standards for our teachers. And I think that Republicans and conservatives can't run from these issues. I see Republicans in Virginia who are afraid to talk about tenure reforms. They don't want to take on the teachers' unions. I see conservatives who are afraid to talk about vouchers and charter schools because they think that that's something that would create more federal supervision and more federal control. And I see conservatives who want to talk more about preventing core standards in the curriculum, and they want to talk about charter schools educational reform. As a movement and as a party, we've got to be comfortable talking about these issues and supporting them, because that is a real pathway to get Black, Hispanic, and Asian support going forward. The Black, Hispanic, and Asian communities depend on public education for social and upward mobility. They depend on a high-quality K-12 system, and they depend on a high-quality university system. And we've got to make it clear that as Republicans, we're going to keep those pathways open. We've got to be willing to fund higher education. We can't view higher education as something that's not a high priority for our states. We've got to recognize that top quality universities is part of what makes states attractive and desirable. And I think there's a perception sometimes that we as Republicans are so suspicious of government and so hostile to big government that we don't know how to recognize when government is working. And that's a legitimate critique of some in our movement. We have to know that some government can work. And guess what? Public education is always going to be one of the first and foremost obligations of government. Not everybody will ever be able to afford to go to a private school or will want to go to a private school. We've got to make public education work too, and Republicans have to be comfortable with the language of talking about education reform.
Mr. Davis, as a congressman representing the Democratic Party, you voted against Obamacare. The fact that you were among the minority in your former party who voted against Obamacare, and taking into account that most Americans, as you kindly mentioned earlier, most Americans are against Obamacare, would you say that we are facing a groupthink, political pressure, or a genuine conviction among the elected Democrats when it comes to Obamacare?
Well, it became very clear to me that there's no place for you in the Democratic Party if you don't support Barack Obama's agenda on health care, and I accept that. I think it's wrong, but I accept that the Democratic Party has its mind made up on this issue. I don't think Obamacare is going to work. It's going to cost more money than we can afford. It's not going to reduce private premiums. We had a mild slowdown in the rate of premiums going up this year. But for the last 3 years, premiums have continued to rise. For the first 2 years of Obamacare, premiums have continued to rise. And the Congressional Budget Office predicts that the average American is going to pay 3.5% more every year for private health insurance. Obamacare is not only not going to do anything about that, many experts believe Obamacare is making it worse. There's no question that Obamacare is going to cause some companies to drop the coverage they have today. There's no question that Obamacare is going to cause some small businesses to drop the coverage they have today. And there's no question that Obamacare is going to cause some businesses to stay smaller and to hire fewer people. I don't think it's going to work. And I think that we can find a way to provide health insurance for that class of Americans who can afford it, but I think we can do it without a massive bureaucratic takeover of 1/6 of our economy. So Obamacare is the law of the land because of the Supreme Court. They narrowly upheld it. We'll see what happens over the next several years. But I predict to you that in 2016, instead of Obamacare disappearing as a political issue, I think there's going to be significant pressure from the American people to change it and to reform it. And I think Republicans, frankly, are probably going to be talking more about the Obama health care law in 2016 than we talked about it today, because as you know, but everyone in the audience may not appreciate, a lot of the health care law has not taken effect yet. All of it will have taken effect by 2016, and I think the American people are going to see that they aren't going to like the way it works, and they're going to feel they have fewer choices, not more choices, and I think a major issue in 2016 is going to be how we fix this law that isn't working.
Right. And beside Obamacare, what do you see as major issues being pursued by Obama administration which will be detrimental to our fellow American citizens, to their liberties, and for the economy?
Well, President Obama made it very clear yesterday in his first news conference since June. President Obama made it very clear that he wants to raise taxes, and he wants one of the biggest one-time tax increases that we've had in this country. And he's made it clear that he's not going to bend on this. He's not going to compromise on it. He's more concerned with raising marginal tax rates than he is doing away with deductions that actually, in many cases, a lot of Republicans be willing to do away with. He's more concerned about raising taxes and raising marginal rates. And he's made it clear that he's not going to sign a bill that doesn't create a tax increase for many Americans. I think that's wrong. And I think that if Barack Obama has his way, that I think it will damage the economy and it will slow the economy down. So I hope President Obama doesn't get his way in this regard. Second of all, it's very clear that President Obama has no new ideas about how to rein in spending and entitlements. We can't continue to sustain Medicare at its current levels. It'll bankrupt the system. It's very clear President Obama has no solution beyond the usual political answer about find more waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, you're not going to fix the Medicare problem or the cost of Medicare by going after waste, fraud, and abuse. That's not going to happen. It's not going to work. We're going to have to rethink what Medicare covers. We're going to have to rethink who it covers, and we're going to have to rethink how it's financed. And to be very candid, as a lot of people in your audience recognize, we are not going to be able to continue in perpetuity a Medicare system where the average American gets 4 times in benefits what they actually paid into the system. It'd be nice if we could do that, but that's not going to work. It's not going to be sustainable. President Obama is not remotely prepared to address this problem, and the fact that he demonized even reasonable bipartisan proposals to tackle this problem during the campaign suggests to me that we're going to get 4 more years of kicking the can down the road. And I'll slip in one other thing. It's very clear that we're going to get 4 more years of regulation. We're going to get 4 more years of bureaucracy, 4 more years of government adding more and more red tape to the burden of running a business. I don't know if the coal industry can survive 4 more years of the Obama administration. There are going to be communities all around this country that shut down because the Obama administration is more or less trying to regulate the coal industry out of existence. So obviously the American people made the choice they wanted to make, but I'll be candid with you, we don't always get it right. The voters don't always get it right, and I think there are going to be challenges for our country in the next 4 years, but it's incumbent on us as Republicans to figure out how to make more people see our way.
In fact, Mr. Davis, we've been discussing with a number of our guests here about the deep field of great candidates that we have for higher office in the days to come. We have certainly Governor Bobby Jindal, Senator Marco Rubio, and a host of others, including yourself. And do you remain hopeful for the next 4 years?
I am very optimistic about the quality of the Republican field that's out there. I think that Marco Rubio is one of the genuine talents in American politics and one of the best communicators in American politics. I think that Governor Jindal is one of the best governors in the country, and I think that Governor Jindal is exactly right about the kind of smart, reform-oriented conservatism that we have to adopt. I think that Paul Ryan is obviously someone who has an enormous amount of stature within the Republican Party, and he's certainly going to be at the front of the line. In addition to those 3 individuals, there are all kinds of other people who are talented, smart Republicans who are going to be part of this conversation in the next 4 years. And I don't think the issue is going to be finding a candidate in 2016. We had trouble getting people to run the last time. I suspect we're going to have a lot of good people run the next time. The challenge is going to be redefining our philosophy to make it palatable to large numbers of Americans. The blunt reality is that we can't win elections with conservatives alone. We're going to be a conservative party, but we're going to have to be a conservative party that gets the votes of moderates, and that's just the reality and the mathematics of it.
And on this note, we conclude our discussion with Mr. Davis. Thank you so much, Congressman Davis, for joining us this weekend on America's Roundtable, and we look forward to continuing our important discussion on America's future, its economy, and some of the key reforms that certainly will lead us to brighter days ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much to both of you, and good to talk to your audience today.
It is appropriate to quote President Ronald Reagan. He said, "In America, our origins matter less than our destination, and that is what democracy is all about." President Reagan also stated, "Freedom is never more than 1 generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it out to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same." This is America's Roundtable. Visit us at americasrt.com. Follow us on Twitter at americasrt. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook. Like and share.